Hello everybody, I'm James Golding and welcome to Gunroom.tv Food. Today we're going to be cooking pheasant. And pheasant's one of those birds that you can eat it all year round, and it sometimes sits in your freezer for a decent amount of time. So you can basically cook this with any sort of springtime vegetables or with the stuff that's coming into season around sort of autumn time. So if you're looking to create a pheasant dish which isn't basically your usual mashed potatoes or in a stew or in a curry, then this lends itself very, very well. Today I'm going to be cooking my pheasant with some oyster mushrooms, some pancetta, and some of this beautiful rainbow chard from our garden. I'm going to be finishing it with some maple syrup vinegar, and we're going to be seasoning it with blackthorn salt. For those of you that can't get oyster mushrooms, you can use chestnut or any other sort of button mushroom really that you can find, but I think oyster mushrooms work really well because you can fry them and get a really fantastic umami flavour from these guys. So let's begin by taking the breast off of the pheasant. Now you can cook this whole if you wanted to, but for the purposes of this dish I'm just going to take the breast off. Remove the leg, just like so, and we're going to use this on something else actually. I actually love to confit pheasant legs, so we're not going to waste this. It won't go to waste. This is purely just set to one side. It'll go back in the fridge and I'll be dealing with that tomorrow. You follow down the breastbone. You can see the wishbone at the back here, so let your knife glide along the breastbone and then just follow the natural lines of the carcass to remove the breast, like so. So as you can see, sometimes you can see where the lead's gone in. Now that doesn't mean that that breast is wasted. You can literally just scrape that off and just trim it, and 9 times out of 10 the shot will actually have gone straight through into the cavity anyway, so I wouldn't worry too much. You can also inspect it. Obviously if you turn it over you can see that there's no blood clots on the other side, so that's how you know that that's pretty much safe. We're going to put this back. Like I said before, this will be set to one side and used for something else. First things first, we're going to get our pheasant breast cooking and our pancetta lardons crisping up. So we're going to sear this pheasant breast now. Firstly, I'm going to season it lightly with some sea salt. So I'm doing that over the pan, both sides. I'm going to put a dash of vegetable oil, and again we want to hear that sizzling sound, so that's what we want to hear. And the idea with seasoning this over the pan is just to keep that seasoning in here. Sometimes when you season on a tray you lose half of it on the way over to the pan. We're going to colour this on one side, so we're going to get a lovely golden brown colour. Remember, colour is flavour, but obviously we don't want to cook it too far in the pan. If we cook it too far then it's going to go tough. So we probably want around, yeah, about that. So you can see it's sort of the colour of wet sand. We're going to add in, I'm going to add in some thyme and garlic, a little bit more oil. Turn this down and we're going to put it into the oven at around 186 degrees. But before we go in there, we flip it over. Beautiful golden brown colour, yeah? Sit the pheasant on top of the fillets, and in we go. Okay, so now we need to cook off the pancetta lardons. A little bit of veg oil in the pan, this just gets it going, and we're going to add in our pancetta. If you haven't used pancetta much before, pancetta is the belly of the pork, and it's been salted down with black pepper, bay, rosemary, and basically cured. Usually we cure it for about 24 hours and then it goes into smoke. So we smoke this in oak, and what that does, it gives it a fantastic rich bacon, smoked bacon flavour, and that works really well with the mushrooms. So once we've got it frying like this, we're going to turn the heat right down to minimum, because what we want to do is crisp those lardons up. You will naturally get a little bit of moisture come out the lardons, but don't worry about that. Just keep on cooking them and that will evaporate off. So we're going to leave those now, and I'm going to prep my oyster mushrooms. So to prep your oyster mushrooms, they basically have a natural rip line, and you gently pull them apart, sort of about a centimetre at a time, and they will naturally, you know, fall off into these fantastic little strips. Oyster mushrooms, I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever been out foraging, but it's one of those mushrooms that you'll never see it until it's right in front of you. And they don't grow in the ground like a normal mushroom. When they're out in the wild, these things actually grow off of the side of tree trunks, which have fallen down, they're rotting down, and you'll turn a corner and you'll see a tree trunk covered in them. And they're really, really great sort of new season mushroom. They're around this time of year, sort of spring, summertime, and they work so well with pheasant. You can actually buy kits of these. I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever had a go at growing their own mushrooms, but you can actually buy oyster mushroom kits, and they come in these bags with compressed wood chips, and they put the mycelium through the bags. So what you do is you stab holes in the bags and you put it somewhere a little bit moist, you know, you can put it in an airing cupboard with a bowl of water in there, and they will actually start to sprout. So if anybody's interested in growing their own mushrooms, check it out. It's a great way to have a cut and grow again product. So we're going to fry those off in a minute, and I'll talk a bit about how we're going to do that. But first of all, we need to get our chard going, and this is rainbow chard, obviously called rainbow because of all the incredible colours that you can get with this stuff. We also grow quite a few different varieties in our garden down at the Pig. We have Swiss chard, which is essentially this. The rainbow chard looks very similar to beetroot leaves, and you can actually eat beetroot leaves. So this adds a fantastic colour. We're just going to rip off these. We don't want to be chopping it up. We're going to take off the stalks because these can be a little bit fibrous, but you can pickle these. So you souse them with vinegar, and these add a really great sort of zing to a lot of things like salads or charcuterie boards. So don't throw them in the bin. Please keep hold of them, and I'll post a recipe at some point soon talking about how to preserve them. So make sure you get a good variety of colour, and I'm going to show you how to quickly blanch these. Obviously the traditional way is to get your pan of boiling water going, you know, waiting for ages for it to boil and then plunge it in there. This is the easy way to do it. Turn your kettle on, wait for it to come up to the boil, which hopefully won't be too long. And pour it over your charred leaves. And what that does is it shocks the leaves and basically softens them very, very quickly. But the important thing is after you've shocked them to run them off under a cold tap. And what that does, that sets the chlorophyll. And that's what keeps it bright green and vibrant. So we'll give a little mix, and then over to the sink to refresh them. Okay. That's perfect, so we're going to let that rest now. And crack on with our oyster mushrooms. So the lardons are almost completely crisp now. I'm going to leave those on the back. And when you're cooking the oyster mushrooms, it's very important that you start it off in a hot pan. Bit of veg oil. Crank that up to full. And a good way to test that you've got a hot pan, but be very, very careful, is just to drop a couple of small drops of water into your pan. So as it heats up, it will inevitably spit a little bit, but you will know that that pan is red hot and ready to go. So that's coming up now. Oyster mushrooms. That's the sound. It's very important when you're cooking mushrooms not to season them too early. If you add salt in as soon as they go into the pan, what happens is that salt draws all the moisture out, and that's when they start to boil. So you know when you're cooking mushrooms in the pan, suddenly all the water comes out and you're sort of boiling them and not getting any colour. That's because you've added salt. So it's very important to to not do that. You can add pepper, which we'll do now, and we'll get them frying off. We're going to add the lardons in as well. So you've got the fat from the lardons, which is also going to go into the pan, and that will help fry the mushrooms. Smells delicious. I wish there was smell-o-vision on this. It's smelling really, really good. So take our pheasant over to the board to let it rest, ready for carving. And we keep this liquor as well from the pan. I'm going to add a knob of butter to these mushrooms now, as this will give us the sauce. Mix the butter through and add in probably about a tablespoon of the maple vinegar. So with the fat from the pheasant breasts, I'm going to add in this wilted rainbow chard, and what we're doing is just warming it through. We don't want to cook that anymore really. So we've added the rainbow chard into the juices from the pheasant, so we're just letting the residual heat warm those through nicely. I'm going to season that with some sea salt, set that to one side, and we're going to carve our pheasant breast. So this should be perfect medium, which it is. That's fantastic. So you don't want to cut it too thin. I usually do around sort of 3 or 4 cuts. Put that to there. We get our plate over here, and before I do that, I've got some beautiful flat leaf parsley that I've just picked from the garden, and we're going to add those into the mushrooms. You don't want to chop this too heavily. We basically just want it to have a nice, still keep the shape, but you know, have a nice few cuts. So we'll give that a mix round. And let's plate it up. So we're going to place our rainbow chard with all those lovely colours. Make sure you try and get all the different golden, purple colours in there so that you can see that coming out, poking out from underneath. Pheasant breasts just laid over the top. You want to see a little bit of the flesh, but obviously make sure that you do it skin side up, so you've got that lovely golden skin. And then we've got our mushrooms and pancetta, and this just reminds me of, you know, of this time of year. I mean, you've got the smokiness of the bacon, you've got that fantastic umami flavour coming from the oyster mushrooms, and then just a little sort of zing of acidity from the maple dressing. So that just gets poured around the outside. Clean the plate up a little bit. There's all that amazing juices around there. And there we go, that's my pheasant with rainbow chard, pancetta and oyster mushrooms with a maple dressing.